Merry meet y'all. Answering some viewer mail today. I've been asked this question often, and I've always responded in message form to the person that asked me, and I've never actually put this out on video. But so somebody just asked me again, so I figured I'd answer this question for the whole world. The question is, do you do podcasts? Well, I did podcasts once upon a time. And if you've watched my videos, maybe you heard this story. One day, the Morgan Fire, who has a channel on YouTube, he's one of my students, and he ended up teaching on YouTube and suggested to me that I should teach witchcraft on YouTube. And I said to him, no, I'm an old radio guy, and I don't really understand video. I've been in radio for a long time. And so I said that to him, and I fired off the message, and after I said the message, I recognized a certain tone in the message, and it's the limiting voice that limits ourselves. It keeps us from going further, it keeps us from doing better. And I had trained myself to do the opposite of whatever that voice said long ago, but sometimes it'd sneak up on me. So I made my first video moments after I just said to the kid, basically, I'm too old, I don't understand this newfangled technology. So then I got into YouTube. But before that, I had a long history in radio and a little story. I'm a storyteller, and I like to teach with story. Somewhere around 1994 in this little city called Santa Cruz, somebody tried to launch this project, pirate radio station, a micro radio station. It was near the forefront of a movement that was taking off at the time of here in America of getting people to be able to access the public airwaves and not have corporations control the airwaves. Small broadcast stations that citizens could operate. A movement started out of that. It went on for a long time, and eventually we actually did beat the FCC, and now there is a low wattage licensing plan here in America. But that's another story. But when this project was first getting ready to start, I showed up. I was a political activist at the time with the Earth First, the IWW, Food Not Bombs. I wore a lot of hats. And I also was a radio technician, so I was really encouraged by this project, so I figured I'd show up and see if I could get involved with this project. We got involved with, when we got there, they already had a transmitter, they already had the audio equipment, they already had an antenna, and they already had this right-wing son of a bitch, Tom Reveille was his name, and he was trying to run the show. And I don't know if I mentioned, I was an anarchist, still am, so I really didn't go along with a lot of rules, and this guy brought only rules to the party. And it was a big meeting was happening, and this guy who was running the project wanted us all to sign a document, Declaration of Free Speech, I believe it was called. I already didn't like this guy. He rubbed me the wrong way. He irked me. And at this time, there was no pagan movement in Santa Cruz. Plenty of pagans, but no organization, nothing for anybody to do, way before we had witch stores in this town. And so this Thelemite that I know, he chimed in and said to Mr. Reveille, he says, well, I can't sign that piece of paper because my religious beliefs forbid me to do so. My initiatory oaths included not entering into written agreements with humans. I thought about it for a minute. I said, I could tweak my religious or my initiatory oaths into something similar to that. So, I jumped up and said, hey, me too. Me too. I can't sign that either. And then, so the guy said, well, you guys just won't be on the radio. I said, so already you're marginalizing the marginalized. You're already not going to give the pagans ability to the pagans and the occultists, the ability to be on Free Radio Santa Cruz, or actually it was going to be Radio Free Santa Cruz was their name, and then an Earth Firster stood up, and they're pagan, and he disagreed, and pretty soon everybody, it always takes the first person, and then there was just this wave through the room of people that disagreed with this project, didn't want to go with this project, didn't want to get involved in this project because of all the rules, and a mythical line was drawn down the room. A separation happened, and people on one side of the line said, all right, well, we'll just go start our own radio station, and people on the other side of the line, you go take your radio station and go fire that thing up. When the smoke cleared, there was about 5 people on the side of the room that already had a transmitter, and the rest of the room was what would become Free Radio Santa Cruz, which to this day is the longest continually running pirate radio station in the country. It's going to be 20 years soon, right? So I had a long, fruitful career as a technician and radio personality and poster boy in the local press. I was also a musician, playing protest songs, so a lot of my music got played on the radio station. And it's somewhere around 1998. Still, no pagan movement in Santa Cruz, lots of pagans. The majority of paganism and witchcraft, Wicca, all of it in Santa Cruz was goddess-centric and dominated by lesbians. And pretty much everybody in Santa Cruz thought that you had to be a woman and not a heterosexual woman to be a witch. I would help to change that. No problem with anybody else's lifestyle, but to limit my lifestyle. I came from another land and where that was not the case. We had all types in the craft back where I came from. So, at any rate, around 1998, I got this wild hair up my ass because somebody suggested it about 2 in the morning every night on the pirate radio station, teaching witchcraft on the air. And that was the name of the show. It was the program was called It's a Beautiful World, and the show was called Witchcraft on the Air. And I think it was about five shows, which is, typical length of an intro class to this day. It's like 5 weeks. I taught this on the radio, kind of with a similar philosophy that I did with YouTube, trusting that the gods would bring along the right people that just happened to tune in to hear that at the right time, and I wouldn't get a bunch of Christian wackos messing with me. Same idea I had with YouTube. I throw it out there. I don't advertise much. I don't put a whole lot in the taglines. And goddess willing, only the good people or the right people will show up to the party. And it happened. It turned out, I found out later, after teaching this thing over the air, that I had several correspondence students around Santa Cruz. And this was only around Santa Cruz. Eventually, Free Radio Santa Cruz would be broadcast over the web, and they're still there. It's freakradio.org. I'm the one that called it Freak Radio, and I love that they still use that, and they still call it that. I came up with the idea, just like Freakville 1309. I have a whole philosophy of freak, and that's for another time. But Freak Radio Santa Cruz, also known as Free Radio Santa Cruz, still exists. You can hear it at freakradio.org. But back to the original premise, the podcast. Well, later, technology would develop. This internet thing would happen, and we would get the ability to archive these shows on this little pirate radio station and put them up for the whole world to have. It was originally a network for pirate radio stations to exchange programs, to exchange data, something that's really common in this day and age, but it was like revolutionary at the time for us to be able to transmit audio over the internet, download it on the other end, and then broadcast it over the airwaves. So that was fucking revolutionary and blew my mind. So I was making MP3s. Well, actually, I think they were MP2s back then, and it might have even been just an MPEG before that, as if I recall correctly. And there's WAV files. I don't even think those exist anymore. But at any rate, I just double checked it, and I did podcast. I podcast. Well, there's a bunch of my stuff, a bunch of my programs, a bunch of my music, I think it seems to be there, and the entire Witchcraft on the Air radio series from 1998, when there pretty much was just a Wicca, there wasn't much else. I made this class, and it still exists, and I found it. I'm going to tell you, how you can listen to it or download it to your podcast. It's been a lot of years. I have a lot of changes in philosophy, but I tell you, I just checked on it, and I just played a couple episodes, and it's not that different. I've been teaching some of the same core things for a very long time, and apparently I was teaching those same things back at Free Radio Santa Cruz back in the day, and those podcasts are still out there. So to make a long story just a little bit longer, what you need to do is you go to radio4all.net. That's radio, the number 4, all.net. And there's a little search engine there, and you got to search my other name, Phil Free, Philfree. My radio name, my stage name, my name as a musician. I've had different names for different portions of my personality over the time. It's kind of like a controlled schizophrenia or bipolar, tripolarism. I control my different personalities by giving them different names. But all of my personalities, they've always taught witchcraft. So you go to radio4all.net, search Phil Free in the search thingy, and a buttload of my archives and archives of shows with me on it come up, but specifically the Witchcraft on the Air. I think it's worth a listen. You definitely see how I've changed over the years and haven't changed, and it's the equivalent I have to a podcast. Several people I heard from just listen to the videos while they're driving. It's the equivalent of a podcast, which is good because I'm not always using visual aids, so it works fine. Sometimes we're just sitting here talking, so it's a work podcast. But radio4all.net, search Phil Free, and there's a bunch of podcasts. I probably won't podcast. Maybe if there was like a group podcast that I could get in on where I wasn't doing everything, where I wasn't carrying it all, maybe I would podcast. But in reality, to me, it's kind of a step backwards. It pains me to admit it. A radio man from way back. Radio's a dying art form, and I wish it wasn't. But radio's a dying art form. Maybe audio is too. Print's definitely dying, but video, we got video, and we got access to our own video. So I probably, most likely won't be doing podcasts, but I'll continue doing video casts, and hopefully that'll work for you. So there's my answer to the viewer, who I forgot even who I was answering at this point, but hopefully you see the video, and there's your answer. And to everybody that asked me that question, there's your answer. Thank you very much. Blessed be, merry meet, merry part, merry meet again.